Beyond Borders.
Beyond Borders.
It's Borderline
with Ireti Bakare-Yusuf.
Welcome back to Borderlines, the only show that's beyond borders. Yes, we've been to South Africa. Now we're coming back home, just a stopover, and now we are flying. I can't say whether it's one of my favorite countries, but certainly my next guest is one of those people I have wanted to be in discussion with. I promise you, sit back, hold tight, let me start. So, he is one of Europe's most vocal and unapologetic, critics of the war in Gaza. He's a man who has used his platform, both in academia and in politics, to speak truth to power, even when he stands alone. He is best known as the former Minister of Finance for Greece and the founder of the Democracy in Europe movement. But beyond economics, he has emerged as one of the fiercest voices in Europe, condemning what he calls the genocide in Gaza and the complicity of Western governments, including the EU, in enabling Israel's war machine. In an era where European leaders have rallied unconditionally behind Israel, in fact, some of them have been accused of being a coward, Varoufakis has accused them of moral cowardice. I hadn't even read my script when I said that. Of moral cowardice. It is an absolute pleasure. In fact, no, let me just say. He also called them whitewashing war crimes and of betraying the very values Europe claims to uphold: freedom, justice, and human rights. My special guest today is Yanis Varoufakis. Welcome to Nigeria, to Borderlines, to Lagos, albeit digitally. Can you hear me?
Well, thank you so much for having me.
It's our pleasure.
I'm not going to just say that out of politeness. I mean it. It's a great honor and a great pleasure to be speaking with you.
Oh, thank you.
Because these are difficult times, and unless we unite in serious and radical condemnation of white settler philosophies, which we can see now spreading across the globe, with Palestine being, of course, the epicenter. Humanity is not going to have a future. Nothing short of humanity's future depends on the solidarity that we show one another to fight the logic of apartheid and the logic of, might is right, which has come back to haunt us after a period when we lived an illusion, the illusion of international law, the illusion that the West cared about human rights and civil liberties, as you said. They never did care. They never cared. We lived under an illusion. At least we owe them that. Now we don't live under that illusion. Now we can unite in order to make what used to be an illusion a reality.
Indeed. I mean, I'm glad you started like that, because I was actually going to start with a quote of yours, and I will read it out for the benefit of our listeners. Radical internationalist solidarity that once united the world against tyranny. So let's talk about tyranny. You need to break that down for us, if you could do that in a minute, because there's so many questions we have to fit in. You talk about tyranny, you talk about fascism. That quote is actually from your monologue about 80 years ago, when the world came together against fascism. Now, today, we have what's going on in Ukraine. We have what has happened since, in South Africa. We have what's going on in Gaza. We have what's going on in Congo. All over. It'll appear that, like you rightly said, when we said never again, we seem to have forgotten that it applies to everybody, doesn't it?
Well, clearly it doesn't. But allow me to try to stick to the constraints that you so helpfully imposed upon me to explain what radical humanism humanism is in less than a minute. I think I'll succeed in doing that because it's not that difficult. You see, in my capacity as a finance minister, as an academic of some kind of reputation, I had the opportunity over the last 20 years to meet with people not in Davos, but the Davos kind of people, the bankers, the ministers, and the conglomerate CEOs and so on. And you know what? They show immense solidarity to one another. I've seen Nigerian bankers sit around the table with Swiss bankers, with German bankers, with American bankers, with Greek bankers, and they're brothers in arms. There's no racism between them. There is nothing dividing them, right? So the bankers show solidarity with one another. So do the fascists. The warmongers, the people who make a mint out of selling weaponry, the fossil fuel magnates. They are brothers and sisters in arms. Isn't it time that we became brothers and sisters in arms to fight them? Because they are united, unless the rest of us, the majority, the global majority, unless we find a way of uniting behind what is in the collective interest, they will destroy us, and they destroy the planet in the process, actually.
Well, let's talk. Where do I start? Okay, let's talk about Israel first. Israel, Gaza, because I also want to talk to you about capitalism, okay, and how it's affecting democracy today, especially the changing face of democracy today, in particular relation to the global south, etc. But first of all, let's talk about why is Israel part of the Eurovision Song Contest? And honestly, they came second. Are we watching the death of moral authority?
And they won the vote of the public.
Yeah.
Let us not forget that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's mind-numbing. Okay, look, the reason is because what's happening in Israel, in Palestine, is entirely the logical extension of European colonialism. We Europeans created the monster of white settler philosophy. I spent 12 years of my life living in Australia. Now, how did that happen? It happened because towards the end of the 18th century, a British fleet arrived where New South Wales is today, and they looked at this magnificent continent that is, the British naval officers, like Captain Hook and so on, and they loved it, and they said, we want it. The first thing they did to conquer it was to declare it an empty land, a terra nullius. They saw 6 million natives, the First Nations, and they immediately described them as non-humans. They didn't do it in so many words, but by calling the land a land without a people, for a people without a land, that's a first step to genocide. So there were 6 million, Aborigines, natives, First Nations in between 6 and 7 million of them. Today, we're talking about far less than 1 million. Or maybe less than 200,000. It depends on how you count it, right? So it worked. The genocide worked. The United States is the result of a series of genocides of First Nations people. In Kenya, the British carried out genocide. In South Africa, of course, right? In Namibia, the Germans, they carried out a massive genocide of the people in Namibia. Across Africa. Not just the slave trade, but actual white settlement. We declare this land to be empty of people, and therefore you're not people, and therefore we can kill you. We can shoot you as if you were. And so, the Israelis, the Zionists, right? The Zionists have a point when they say to the Germans, to the British, what are we doing that's so different to what you did? So in a sense, they do belong to Eurovision. If Eurovision is this cultural monstrosity, it is the extension of this European history of appropriation, expropriation, displacement, and essentially, plunder. Then for them, this, for the Zionists, it's simply a matter of waiting. I remember in the 1970s, because I'm old enough to remember the late 1970s, I remember there was a discussion between the Australian Prime Minister at the time and P.W. Botha, that awful man who was the apartheid Prime Minister in South Africa. And the Australian Prime Minister was, pointing the finger at him and saying, this is not right, you're oppressing the blacks and so on in South Africa. And Botha turned around and said, well, the only difference between us and you, mate, is that you killed all of your blacks and we were not as successful as you were. Right? So, that's the European mentality. Now, the Europeans after 1945 supposedly learned their lessons and introduced the Geneva Convention, international law, human rights. But, ever since, they have only utilized it and only appealed to it when it suited their imperialistic interests. When it didn't suit them, then they forgot about it. So, suddenly it's not a problem killing half the population in Gaza and starving them to death. So, and you see, I'm a European. So I have a duty to call out Europe for what it is doing to the rest of the world and to our own peoples here in Europe, supposedly in our name.
I know, gosh, where do I start? So this week or this last week, we saw suddenly a change of voice, a turnaround from France, from Canada, surprisingly, and incredibly from the UK, from Keir Starmer. Of course, Israel has told them, look, you no longer, you left, we got rid of you since 1917. We don't care about you anymore. We took over in 1948, I paraphrase. Netanyahu has since then come out and said, pretty much called them a coward and said, you're allowing Hamas to win if Hamas starts thanking you. What are your thoughts on this turnaround? Even more so, when we hear and read from the likes of Piers Morgan, who was always speaking for, the Western narrative in favor of Israel. What has happened? Where do we place this? What do we call them?
Well, I think they were embarrassed by the quantities of blood that were being spilled in Palestine. So, on the one hand, it's not a bad thing that they have been shamed into performing something of a U-turn. But will you be cross with me if I tell you that I'm not convinced, that I think that they are absolute hypocrites? Because they could stop the Israeli meat grinder in 24 hours. In 24 hours, they could just put an end to the genocide. Not by threatening to take steps. Why are they threatening to take steps? What else do they need to trigger action? For instance, they don't even need to send an army to Israel. All they have to do is they have to order Maersk, the Danish transportation company, to stop delivering fuel, jet fuel. All they need to do is they need to tell Lockheed Martin, you're not going to deliver spare parts for the F-35s. All they have to do is to tell BlackRock or Microsoft. Microsoft is, together with Amazon, together with Google Alphabet, they are running, in association with Israeli companies, they are running the algorithms which are keeping the Israeli Defense Force going. They could simply press a button and stop the Israeli meat grinder. But they're not doing that. They are threatening to take action when? What do they want? They want first every single Palestinian to be murdered, and then they will take action. No. This is simply a hypocritical show that they are putting on for their own electors. You see, they are fearing their own. You saw what happened in the United Kingdom, even in the last summer's general election. There were a number of independents that were elected, which is very difficult, with first past the post in Britain, to elect anyone against the major parties. Simply because they took the right stand regarding Palestine. So, Keir Starmer was forced to make this weasel-like, cowardly statement, which is in lieu of real action.
talk to us about the leadership of the EU right now, because I think you have the Ursula von, whose name goes, the rest of her name goes out of my head now. You have her, and then sorry,
von der Leyen.
Yes, there you go, it's von der Leyen. And then you have an EU that seems to be so heavy-footed that it's not able to respond to world issues, or is it that it can't respond because it is so heavy-footed? And then you said something in one of your monologues. You said, where is it? I think I have to play it for you. Are we ready with that part? Let me play this for you. It's better said by you than me. I'll play it for you. I hope you can hear us.
My general message to my British friends who are listening is, I have some bad news for you. You're not that important. This is a much bigger game. The United Kingdom is utterly irrelevant when it comes to the grander scheme of things. Here you have a major game of chess between the United States, the European Union, and China. These are the three main players. The India-Britain deal, the US-UK deal, they are tiny little pipsqueaks of deals in this grander scheme of things. And the interests of the people of Britain are going to be determined. Your prospects will not be determined by these small deals. They will be determined by how this larger geopolitical, geoeconomic chess game is being played.
The headline news on 99.
Right, so you've reduced the almighty UK into a piddly little peanut in an ocean of big players. But then again, I'd like you to also talk to us about, explain that, and then also explain to us about what, I mean, at the very least, some see as the heavy-footedness of the EU, why it took Trump throwing a tantrum before they began to actually seem to make a change to what was overdue.
Well, let me start with the UK. The UK, after Thatcher, vandalized its industry in the late 1970s and early 1980s. I used to live in Britain then. I cut my political teeth in demonstrations against Mrs. Thatcher. She vandalized, she totally eradicated British industry. And the reason why she did that was because she wanted to defeat the trade unions. And she actually said that, I'm not making this up. She actually said that she's going to employ the strategy of American generals in Vietnam who were destroying the forest in order to burn down the Viet Cong. So she destroyed the steel industry, she destroyed effectively the car industry, she destroyed the energy industry, she privatized everything, shrunk everything, in order to get rid of the unions. And she succeeded in doing that. But the result was that there was nothing left in the British economy to actually produce anything. So they financialized everything. So then it became a big bubble. So, if you were a Briton living in a council flat or a council house, which was actually a very good system because, you paid a very small rent, you had security, you had the roof over your head, you didn't have to worry about housing. But Thatcher came to you and said, you know what? The market value of this house is 20,000 quid, but I'll give it to you for 10,000. You go and get a loan for 10,000, and then you have won 10,000. So people rushed and got it. And immediately then they sold it and they bought another one. So the financialization bubble began. So that was a Thatcher miracle. But it was all a bubble. The real productive economy had disappeared. So the result is that the United Kingdom is irrelevant. So that's what I tell my British friends.
And what do they say to you when you tell them that?
I agree.
Oh,
you know what I say to them is that you always think that you are exceptional. That once upon a time you thought that you were fantastic, you were great, you were, the British Empire and so on. You were not. You were, just another case of a big bully. And now you because my friends usually tend to be of the left, naturally, they complain that Britain is the worst place. I said to them, look, it's not the worst. You're not exceptional. You're not exceptionally strong and powerful, and you're not exceptionally
worse.
Awful. You're just an island country that has shrunk to size. Okay, wear it. You are insignificant. I'm from Greece. Greece is insignificant. You are insignificant. Now, let's go to the European Union, because I'm going to be less facetious. I'm going to be a bit more analytical, if I may.
Please.
Because we have to understand, my friends in Nigeria, I would like to convince them that the European Union, which began life in 1950, began life as a large cartel of big business, particularly steel production and coal. It was, the first name of the European Union was the European Communities of Coal and Steel, like OPEC is for oil. And Nigeria is very well connected to that. So the Europeans created a steel, coal, then electrical goods cartel. It wasn't the Europeans who created it. And that, I think, is crucial to understand. It was the Americans who created it. The Americans, after the Second World War, were very worried that a large crisis of capitalism, of their capitalism, of American capitalism, like that of 1929, 1930, 31, the Great Depression, would come back after the war. So they designed a global capitalist system where Europe was one of the linchpins. It was the United States, it was Europe, and it was Japan. China didn't exist at the time because Mao had taken it out of the map of the West. So the Americans designed the European Union, and they built it as a cartel that was functional to the interests of the United States. And you can see that for any country that has entered the European Union, including my country, including all the countries of Eastern Europe, first they have to join NATO before they join the EU, even to this day. First you join NATO, that is, you hand over your army and your territory to the Americans, and then you enter the EU. Now, the reason why this is significant is because after 1971 in particular, the Americans treated the Europeans with contempt. The American regime, the Nixon administration initially, but then, the Carter administration, the Reagan administration after that. And Europe has entered a perpetual crisis ever since, because essentially it was cut off Mother America. Mother America used to look after the Europeans. They would send them credits, and they would send them the Marshall Aid Plan and all that. But after that, after the 1970s, the early 1970s, the Europeans had to fend for themselves. But again, up until 2008, the global environment was looked after by a hegemonic United States. After 2008, it isn't, because the United States doesn't have the power anymore to balance global capitalism. And the European Union has been running around like a headless chicken since 2008. It's not new. What you see, this incongruity, this total failure of politics, morality, of, Europe being insignificant geopolitically. Who cares about what Europe thinks geopolitically? It doesn't geopolitically. This starts from 2008. And also the way we've constructed our economy. Allow me to make the point that, do you realize we have 20 countries being served by the same currency? There's one central bank. It doesn't have a treasury to go with it. That has never happened before in the history of capitalism. And also we have 20 countries that don't have a central bank to support them, because the central bank that we have is not allowed to support the states. So if the United States operated like that, it would have collapsed a long time ago. It wouldn't have existed. Right? So in other words, the European Union is a terrible architectural design. It was initially designed by the Americans, the designers, and we had a fantastic opportunity 10 years ago and so on, when I was finance minister, to bring Europe together so that we would become relevant. But, big business didn't want that, because they wanted to maintain strict regional control of their own populations, of their own markets. So the result now is that the European Union is defunct, essentially. So it's only the clash between the United States and China. That's it.
So does that then mean that the Brits were quite smart, even though they joined the EU, but they didn't give up their currency in order to retain the Central Bank of England?
That was very smart. It was an accident, by the way. It wasn't because they're smart. It so happened that, Gordon Brown, who was the finance minister, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, wanted it. And Blair was worried that he would lose some elections. And he said, let's delay it for a bit. And then the 2008 crisis happens. And then it was impossible to fathom entering the euro that was collapsing. Why would you ever? I mean, the euro became poison.
Indeed.
So it was not so much, intelligence.
It was circumstantial.
Sheer good luck. Sheer good luck.
Sheer good luck. Okay. In that case, so it brings me to, two critical, I feel like, philosophical, existential questions that I have for you, because I know that's very much your space. Let's talk about Zionism and imperialism first. Is Zionism the imperialist weapon to actually hold back the oppressed and to actually steal from, developing countries, etc.?
Well, look, let me say that I don't think that these things are so conscious, even in the mind of the imperialists.
Interesting.
What imperialists just follow, they're very practical people. They look around, they see something in Nigeria that they want, and they want to grab it. They see something in Greece, they see something in Malaysia, they see something in Kenya, and they grab it, right? They are not sophisticated people. But the whole imperialist system operates as if there is a plan behind it. So it's a conspiracy without conspirators. That's the way I see it. So they do stuff, they plunder, okay? They steal. They push you into bankruptcy so that they give you loans that they know you will not be able to repay, so that you enter debt bondage with them. And then they send the IMF in there and say, okay, you close down your schools, you close down your hospitals, you privatize them. I've got a very nice company that will take over your hospitals. So yeah, that's plunder. That's plunder. Okay. Now, to keep this thing together, every economic system needs an ideology. The ideology comes as an epiphenomenon. It comes on top in order to repress any dangerous ideas that come from the dispossessed. So nationalism worked like that in Europe. Okay, so German nationalism, for instance, was what was behind the genocide in Namibia after the First World War and before. Where does Zionism come in? Well, initially, Zionism was created by anti-Jews, by people who hated the Jews. Because, the Balfour Declaration, take the famous Balfour Declaration, which is what started the ball rolling for the Zionists to establish their state in Palestine. The cabinet meeting in which this was decided, that British policy would be to support the creation of a homeland for the Zionists in Palestine, where, of course, they used to live, right? I mean, there were a lot of Jews living in Palestine all this time. The difference is that now the Balfour Declaration talked about their right to live, which means what? It means expelling the others. So that, how can I become a majority when I'm the minority? By getting rid of the majority, right? Or a large chunk of the majority. Now, fascinatingly, the only person who voted against the Balfour Declaration inside that cabinet was the only Jew. And the reason he gave was because, this idea, the Zionist idea, is simply motivated by people who don't want the Jews in Britain anymore. They want to get rid of us. They want to send us to Palestine. And because the British, this is the British mentality and the European mentality. They consider the rest of the world that they colonized their own patch of land. So, I've got something in my own living room, which I don't want. I take it out to an outhouse. Palestine was an outhouse of the empire. They could have said, there was a discussion about Uganda, sending them to Uganda. There was a serious discussion about setting up Israel in Uganda. You know that, right? You must have heard about it.
Oh, yes.
So Zionism is the creation of primarily Jew haters. So when they say, if you're anti-Zionist, you're anti-Jewish, that's precisely wrong. It is, it couldn't be more wrong. And I mean, also to add this, what was significant what happened in Germany. Because after the Second World War, in West Germany, the economic miracle, which was supported by the United States, right? It would not have happened without the United States support. The economic miracle that was the German industrial revolution after the Second World War, the fact that it became such a strong industrial power, it had a problem. Every such industrial bourgeois capitalist regime needs an ideology to hold it together. Now, before the war, it was German nationalism, Deutschland über alles. By the way, Deutschland über alles is not Deutschland, Germany above everything else. This was not the Nazi cry call, it was the German nationalist cry call. Everybody said that in Germany before the war. But that became very difficult to sustain after the Holocaust. And I'm glad that it was difficult to sustain. But they needed an ideology. And it was Adenauer, the German chancellor, prime minister at the time, who in a very significant speech in 1952 explained what he thought the German regime should do in ideological and strategic terms. He used an analysis very similar to that of Hitler. I mean, Adenauer was not a supporter of Hitler. I'm not accusing him of being a Nazi. No, but he used an argument which was very clear, very close to the Nazi argument. And what was this argument? That the rise from the ashes of Germany after 1950, with the Industrial Revolution, is predicated on the support of the United States. And we cannot have the support of the United States if the Jewish lobby in New York is not with us, doesn't approve of us. So we are going to embrace Zionism. So you see, the German capitalist industrial state that is rising up doesn't have an ideology. It can no longer sustain a German nationalist ideology. So it borrows Zionism. And Zionism becomes the official mantra, the official ideology of the German federal system. And to this day, you see that. Even my colleagues at the left, last year, you may have heard of that. Some German Jewish comrades of our movement, DiEM25, in Berlin, and we, DiEM25, we organized a congress in Berlin with a rather innocuous title, A Just Peace in the Middle East. Okay? And we called it this Palestine Congress, A Just Peace in the Middle East. But because people like me organized it with German Jews, the German state went crazy. Because how could they accuse the Jews of being anti-Jewish? Right? But they did. And in the end, they arrested my Jewish comrades and they banned me from entering Germany. And they even banned me from entering Germany via Zoom, by teleconference. What we are doing now.
Sorry to laugh. That is funny.
Yeah, and I'm I'm a citizen of the European Union. And why? Because we don't support genocide. So you see how this whole thing, that's why, but it is important. This is not just some madness that's overtaken the Germans. No, they come out of the Second World War. America's support is essential. American capital support is essential for the rebuilding of the industrial machinery of the Federal Republic of Germany. They need an ideology. They borrow Zionism. Meanwhile, Zionism was created by the people who wanted to get rid of the Jews and send them anywhere, get away from us. And if there are Palestinians there, Muslims, it doesn't matter. They can eradicate them. They can do what we did in Australia. That's the mentality. They can do what they did in Australia. And when they do it, and then Keir Starmer or Friedrich Merz, the current chancellor in Germany, turns around and says to Netanyahu, you shouldn't be doing this. Netanyahu says, what? You did a lot worse than we did.
Which we've since learned he told Biden. Yes, indeed. That's where we are. So coming sort of back to the global south then, to us, to where I am, to my home, to where the part of the world that, I belong to. When you've talked about Zionism and the way the West sort of adopted it, Germany, etc., etc. Now let's look at capitalism. Capitalism and democracy and the way it isn't given, like I think my question is capitalism or democratic capitalism the actual risk negative to the growth of, Africa? Or is it just something that we Africans are yet to be able to manage? I don't know if my question's making sense.
Perfect sense. Makes perfect sense.
Thank you.
Look, let me begin with a preface. There's no such thing as democratic capitalism. It's capitalism and democracy are at war. And you don't to be a very radical thinker in order to get that. I mean, what is the essence of capitalism? The essence of capitalism is that you own as many votes in the shareholders meeting of a company as you can afford, right? You buy the votes. And if you've bought all the votes, or 50% plus one, you are the supreme dictator of that company. That's what and if you have the money, like BlackRock or State Street or Vanguard, these mega corporations in America who control 70% of all the Western companies, right? So they control everything, right? That's consistent with democracy. The democracy is one person, one vote. Like, you can't buy votes. Capitalism is you can have as many votes as you can afford. Okay, so let's be clear on this. And it's a second preface, and I'll be very brief. A second preface is that we must not confuse capital with capitalism. Capital is a machine. It's a produced means of production. It's something, it's like a tractor. It is something we produce to plow the land and to produce wheat or corn or whatever. Of course, we need capital. Capitalism is a system where the tiniest minorities own the machines. And the rest have to be supplicants, and the rest have to be periodically unemployed in order to keep everybody else's wages down. Now, that is not a good model for development. Not for a European country, not for an African country, not for any country. Now, in the case of Africa, you also have the legacy of colonialism, of imperialism. Because one of the problems that capitalism has is because, you see, they do produce the machines. They produce the factories. They generate the factories. But, in Britain, during the Industrial Revolution, in Germany today, as we speak today in Germany, there is what we call in economics excess capacity. So a factory that could produce 100 widgets is running at much lower capacity. It's producing 50. Why? Because the workers who work in the factories do not earn enough to be able to buy everything they can produce. So in the end, you've got overproduction. And when you have overproduction, then they'll try to find markets outside their territory in order to sell. And that's imperialism. So you have extractive imperialism. They came to Africa, they took your people, they took your resources, they took your everything, right? And then they wanted you to become the consumers of the things that the German workers, the British workers, didn't have enough money to produce. So capitalism is a catastrophe for humanity. And it's a double catastrophe for a continent like Africa.
So
but
should
also
we
my
then?
country, because we are... Well, we should take over the machines and socialize them. That's why I'm a lefty. I mean...
Indeed, I should have you with Jeremy Corbyn. I should have you with Jeremy Corbyn for 2 hours. But let me then just ask you quickly,
Jeremy
because
is a great friend of mine.
I can imagine. I mean,
you could have had him speaking to you rather than me. We're interchangeable.
We're actually working on getting him as well. So, you could help us. My producer will be in touch. Okay. You could help us to get him. Okay. So here's the thing, though, very quickly then. Going by what you've said then, how then should we view the likes of IMF and World Bank? In 1 minute, because my listeners have already started to call. How should we receive the institutions like the IMF and the World Bank when they give us so-called advice or they give advice to our governments?
Well, both these institutions are very tragic, They're a case of pure tragedy. Because when they were conceived of in 1944 at the Bretton Woods Conference, even before the Second World War, I mean, the role that they were designed for was a good one. The idea behind the IMF was to coordinate monetary policy and to coordinate fixed exchange rates so that we wouldn't have, a rush of money coming from one country to another, capital flight and all that. The idea with the World Bank was to help the underdeveloped parts of the world, the third world as it was called back then, to develop. But by the early 70s, when this Bretton Woods system, the post-war era, was blown up by President Nixon, then the IMF became bailiffs. They became bailiffs. Their job is now only one. If Tanzania or Ghana or Greece, for that matter, has difficulty securing enough dollars to make its debt repayments, then the IMF takes this as a beautiful opportunity, loves it, and comes to your country and on behalf of the bankers starts effectively confiscating all your assets. Schools, water, electricity, hospitals, everything. That's why I'm saying they're like bailiffs that, the creditor sends in to take the furniture from your house if you haven't repaid your loan because you got sick or because you lost your job or because something happened. So this is the role of the IMF. The World Bank is even worse, actually, because they are predatory lenders. They are lending for projects which are not development-oriented, but they are growth-oriented. And there's a fundamental difference between growth and development. You can build a gigantic dam, of cement and destroy the whole environment, right? And use it in order to produce electricity, which you then give to an oligarch that charges the people a huge price for the electricity that the World Bank has funded. So what I just described is the development of underdevelopment. This is what growth is. Development means to invest judiciously in things that enhance common prosperity. And the World Bank is not doing that.
Indeed. Right. I know you all want to call and we've only got just literally 10 minutes left and I've still got a question. So let me do this and I need you to do this in 5 seconds so I can open up the lines. Donald Trump, Harvard, tariffs, travel ban, expulsion of students, and the drama that we saw the other day, the reality shows every other month. Sum it up for us in short 30 seconds, and then I'll open up the lines, people.
Well, Trump is the creation of Barack Obama. Barack Obama, the first black president of the United States, was elected by a majority of Americans who had lost almost everything in 2008 from the big financial collapse, which was occasioned by Wall Street. And he promised, yes, we can. And what was it that we can do, that he promised, that Obama promised? To put the financial genie back in the bottle, to punish the bankers, to restrict their authority, and to help the many, to help the majority. And he did exactly the opposite. Exactly the opposite. He refinanced the bankers at humongous cost, and he imposed harsh austerity on the majority of the Americans. They got pissed off, and they voted for Trump. That's why I'm saying Trump is the creation of Barack Obama.
Okay.
Because Trump... Oh, well, you want me to be quick. So,
no, go ahead. Go ahead. I'm trying to beg my producer.
Know what Trump really believes. If you really want to know what Trump is all about, just look at the budget that was tabled at the Congress. It passed through the House of Representatives only yesterday. And it's very clear.
The big, beautiful budget, they called it.
The working class. He hates the working class because he's cutting down on Medicaid, on medical care. He's cutting down on food stamps. The only program in the United States that alleviates hunger amongst the poor. He's cutting down on that. He's increasing the budget for the Pentagon, for weaponry. He's increasing the tax handouts to stinking rich people like himself. just follow the money.
Indeed, follow the money. You can call now 0201 2770993, 0201 465 7190. You should have been sending your messages to 0809 597 5805. Yes, and you are calling already. You get one question, people. Don't get carried away. Hello. Hello. Yes, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. This is Brother Mosi.
Go ahead, Pastor.
Yeah, I want to ask your guest, what will the global South do? What is happening? What you have been talking, and I'm just trembling here. We are gone. We are done for. I don't know what we can do.
Do about what? You need to be direct. Do about what?
How to get
our act together. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
To get out of this.
Thank you. Well, how do we get out of this? I don't know what Pastor wants to call it. Is a regular caller, perhaps? Quagmire, mess, this trap, this IMF, World Bank. Certainly, Nigeria, we seem to be in that bondage again. You know, subsidies gone, economies come down. Many people are complaining. Although there's the other half that says subsidy should have been gone a long time ago. I think that's what Pastor wants to know. You can call now 0201 2770993, 0201 465 7190, and WhatsApp 0809 597 5805. You have to be quick. Go ahead. Yanis, I can let you speak. They haven't started calling.
Briefly. Look, there are no magic bullets, silver bullets. Once you are in that situation with the IMF over your head, I know this very well. There are no simple solutions, but Nigeria is not going to escape this debt trap until you have a government which says to the IMF, go away. We are going to default, but we are going to recreate our own economy using our own means, and we are not going to hand over our very, very precious assets to oligarchs that you choose in order to take them over.
Okay.
So, in other words, you need collective resistance, and you need to deal with your own ruling class because you know I know England very well. I know England very well. I know of the Nigerian bourgeoisie that live in England, like the Greek bourgeoisie, who are the real reason why your country is in the situation in which. So, you have to rise up.
Indeed.
If you don't rise up, nobody's going to do it for you.
Okay. Hello, very quickly. Hello.
Godman here.
Hello.
Hello, Sishoge.
Yes, go ahead.
Godman here.
Yes, one question or short comment.
My question is almost similar to the last one. Now, the IMF, the World Bank, what will you advise? What would be your greatest advice to our government if they want to do what's right on how to deal with the World Bank and the IMF? So we don't get into that trap that they set.
Okay. I think he's just answered that. Thank you very much. I think you've just answered that, right?
Well, allow me to say very briefly.
You have 10 seconds. Go ahead. Yes?
I'll answer by example. It's what I tried to do when I was the finance minister of this country. And that is to write down the debt. If you don't write down the debt and default, then there will be no liberty.
Okay, great. I'm coming. They're all calling now. Hello? Okay. Hello?
Yeah, hello, Good evening once again.
Good evening, Emmanuel. Very quickly.
Yeah, I once asked, that is, I'm speaking to your guest right now.
Yes, Yanis,
I once asked Sissioge if some leaders and Trump, we promised 7 virgins in heaven. Why they are giving this massive support to Benjamin Netanyahu.
Okay.
Why is it that...
I need you to wrap it. We don't have time.
Leadership, is still arrogant, enough, to be carrying out this atrocity without blinking.
Okay. Thank you.
To your guest.
Thank you. Right, so I think Emmanuel was being facetious there. He said, as Trump and other Western leaders been promised 7 virgins in heaven in reward to support Netanyahu. 1 second, let me answer this, Yanis. Hello.
Hello, good evening, Sishoge.
Good evening.
My name is Olakoy from Ogun State.
Okay, go on ahead very quickly, please.
The solution to African problem is stop colonialism.
I need you to be clear. Your line is not clear. I can't hear you properly.
stop neocolonialism. Stop collecting loan from IMF. Pay up your debt and stop collecting loan from IMF. That's all. Don't.
Okay, I think he's just basically repeating what you said. Stop collecting loan from IMF.
You can't pay off your debt. You've got to write it down. You have to negotiate it down. And if your creditors don't want to negotiate, you simply cut off their payments.
Right.
And you take the pain. There's going to be pain. But the question is, do the Nigerian people have what it takes to unite together in solidarity with one another to create a better foundation for being able to supply their own goods and services while they're being cut off from international debt markets? It's important to become independent of international debt markets.
Yeah. Right. So you said the Nigerian people, and you mentioned the bourgeoisies, we know that we have a lot of them in the UK, like you said. But here's the thing, though. Even if the debt is negotiated, or we just say, you know what, IMF, we're not going to pay your debt anymore. What can they do to us? What can the IMF do in return? Because, of course, if you owe a bank money, they will take your house or whatever the collateral is. What can they take from us? Or would we be at risk?
Well, the IMF can do nothing to you. Nothing. But
oh, really?
The bankers of London, the bankers of Wall Street, they will gang together to make sure that you will never get another loan. Which, you know what? It's not such a bad thing. Because your regime, just like our regime here in Greece, on the basis of rolling over one debt after the next, they are sinking our countries more and more into dependence and into an extractive kind of economy, which is not conducive to development. So it's not enough not to repay your debt. It's essential to combine the freedom that gives you to utilize your own resources in a way which is productive and which is inclusive, so that society can fend for itself, that it is no longer part of an extractive system. In Nigeria, you had the oil industry, which was supposed to save you. It didn't. It was a curse rather than a gift in the end. And you also had this IMF-driven policy of producing cash crops for sale overseas. But that meant that you could not provide for your own people. So you need to decouple from the international financiers, and that will come at a cost in terms of losing access to funding, but use that freedom in order to reconstitute your productive capacities.
Interesting. Now, I've just been given a couple of minutes extension. I had to beg for it because it's clear that my listeners are enjoying this interview. You can call 0201-277-0993. Make it short, make it sharp, make it succinct. 0201-465-7190. Here's the thing, though. I need to ask you another question, which I had on my list, which we hadn't touched on. Would you say Donald Trump is captured or has been captured, or is a product of AIPAC? Or is it that AIPAC has captured America? Which is it?
Oh, AIPAC has captured America. Every single president of the United States after the Second World War has been captured by the Zionist lobby. Every single one of them. It's impossible to go against, in this adversarial electoral system with first past the post in the United States, with everything depending on outspending your opponent. It's very, very hard when AIPAC has, 100 million to give to any candidate that supports Zionism. When you go against them, you start from minus $100 million.
Wow.
It's not a democracy, of course. It is an auction. It's a pure auction. And AIPAC succeeds in winning every single auction that produces a presidency.
I read, and I've got to quote this to you. I was reading an article earlier on today. It says the end of U.S. empire is not the end of the world. And there's a quote here that I want to share with you, and I'd like your opinion on it. We must contend with a sobering reality. The U.S. may be willing to destroy the world before it surrenders its imperial self-image. Would you agree to that?
I would go further.
Go ahead.
From the 1960s, we know that the American regime was ready to nuke its own territory if the regime felt in danger. If you go back to the 1960s, to the anti-Vietnam War movement, you will discover that the American army opened fire in university campuses, killing scores of Americans. Now, and you know, those anti-war demonstrations were not about to take over American capitalism. I can assure you that if they were close to, if the popular movement, the youth movement, were close to taking over Wall Street, I think, you know, the American army would have nuked America.
Indeed. Yanis Varoufakis. Again, his name is Yanis Varoufakis, Nigerian. He's the former Minister of Finance in Greece, and he's also the founder of Democracy in Europe movement. But also, he's now become a friend of the show. So therefore, he's going to ensure Jeremy Corbyn responds to our email that we've been sending to him, and also of Kasif, who he had on his show last week. Yanis, thank you so much.
I will be seeing Jeremy on Monday. We are on the same panel in Wales.
Oh, fabulous.
So I will grab his arm and twist it until he agrees to do it for you.
Well, we've had a wonderful time talking to you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Have a wonderful weekend. Yes, solidarity indeed.
Solidarity. My greetings from Greece.
Indeed. I'm from Nigeria.
Thank you.
Higher. The battle returns and it's full of fire.
99.3 Nigeria Info. We are more than just radio. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Nigeria Info FM. Check us out on Facebook at Nigeria Info 99.3. Follow us on Twitter at Nigeria Info FM and on Instagram at Nigeria Info FM Lagos for live updates as it happens. 99.3 Nigeria Info. Let's talk.